Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who are listening at whatever time that you're listening to this video. I am Terry Bridges, coordinator of Urban Ministries and pastor of um, Midtown Parish United Methodist Church. I'm really excited about bringing you this introduction to a conversation that I recently had with Jonathan Curtis, director of Carson Simpson Farms, the campgrounds that many of you have gone to. Some of our kids just came back from the camp. They were very excited, spoke very, very highly of their experience. I wanted to sit down with Jonathan because first time I met him was in a meeting, and he made a comment that resonated with me and it just stuck with me. He says that many of the kids, after attending camp, they have such a great time, but they often say to him, when they go back to their churches, they do not have the same experience that they had at the camp. Now, I don't mean that, and I didn't take that as an offense. I just received that as, maybe this is something that we can fix or further minister to our children. So, any rate, I had a sit down with Jonathan. I wanted to pick his brain for our new youth program that we've been running for the last few months. I wanted to pick his brain. I wanted to get his philosophy, and I wanted to be able to say, hey, what do you do there that, all things being equal, that I can implement at my church? And I thought this would be very beneficial to you as well. But again, glean from it what you can. And again, it's just in my hopes that this will bless you, inspire you, and give you some outline in which you can start. My first question to him was, what was his philosophy? What is his overall philosophy in dealing with and putting together a youth program? So with that question, the video will start. Hopefully this will be a blessing to you.
So I think from a camping perspective, my philosophy is, we want to make disciples of Christ, right? That's our overall goal. We want to minister to all kids. I tell my staff, we are constantly looking to serve as Christ served. That's our goal through and through. I think the biggest thing I've learned from working with kids, especially coming from a background of working with at-risk youth for a significant amount of time, I had a great mentor that taught me you've never done everything. There's always something new to try. And when you feel like you've hit a wall with one thing, then you need to think of something else or try something else and be ready for it to fail or for it to work for a week or a day or an hour, and then move to the next thing. I think that has served me well in this transition into camp directing, because that happens with kids all the time, right? As you mentioned, the kids from your church that came, they're all individuals and they all have their own needs. And I want to train my staff to be able to understand that what you do with one kid or what works for one camper is not going to work for the next camper necessarily. And you need to be ready to adjust. I think also what comes with that is relationship. We do a lot teaching about behavior as a staff, and not from a punitive standpoint, which I think when you hear the word behavior, that's where it often leads to. And I like to approach it as behavior, and managing behavior starts with relationships and it ends with relationships, right? So that's kind of what we focus on, is saying every single behavior is motivated. It's motivated. And so you have to figure out what's the motivation so that you can build the relationship. And you're never going to figure out the motivation unless you have the relationship, right? So I think that's what we strive to do, is your first and last objective is build relationship, whether that's playing with the kids, asking them ridiculous questions and then hearing out their answers and then following up with more questions, and I think that creates a sense of ownership for the camper. It creates that connection of saying, oh, this person values my time, values my input, which as a young person, that's hard to feel that way sometimes. So I hope that I somehow answered your question?
Yes, very much so.
Okay.
How would you recommend churches starting out for the first time? Look, we want to start a youth ministry.
Mm.
What are some key things that you would say, here's what your program needs to have if you're going to look to teach and influence and draw young people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you're already doing the first thing right, which is food. I think food is a huge motivator for kids. I always found, even when teaching, like if I had a bag of candy and I was asking questions, man, I got a million responses. They wouldn't always be right, but so food is currency, right? So I think we have a curriculum for everything we do. So I think having any sort of a curriculum, and there's a lot out there, where you have an overarching theme, and then you kind of work back to like, how are we going to reinforce this theme? So the week, the campus for Midtown, we're here in Devereaux, it was 1 week, one slice of that overarching 9-week theme. That was, discover your treasure. Right. So, and so it was, when they got Bible lessons, it reinforced that theme for that week, which then reinforces a bigger theme. Because we do have some campers that come for 9 weeks. I think you do that for a program that you're describing as well. It's just, you could stretch it out for the whole year, or we need to have one for each month. Right. And then honestly, it's that point person who's going to be that person who's going to run it. I know Janelle and I were brainstorming a lot of, okay, what does this look like too? We've got some ideas to kind of increase the amount of campers that come for Peace Ministries, right? And so I think that we kept coming back to this. There needs to be a person in each church that is going to run this, to facilitate, that knows the curriculum, has made the curriculum their own. Because I think, having been a part of other churches like breakout programs or children's church, whatever you want to call it, I think you can tell when you have volunteers or people that are reading it off a script, right? Whereas we try to encourage our staff, I'm like, here's a blueprint, but you need to make it your own, or else the campers or whoever are going to know it's not authentic. And then you're not going to have that connection. You're not going to show Christ to them because you're not, giving of yourself, right? So I think that is a really big piece. And then the only other thing I would add is the pace in which you do things. Our campers do really well when our Bible is story based, not like Fruits of the Spirit is hard. Like, that's a hard lesson to teach, because it's like, unless you're going to attach a story to it. Like, I find that helps the Bible come to life for campers, is when there's a story attached to whatever theme. And then having that person, again, related to themselves, to be authentic, right? And how that relates to them. But then the pace can also talk about the pace of the day, the program. So every 40 minutes, our campers are doing something else. If it's a smaller scale, like one night thing per month, I would say every 10 to 15 minutes, we're moving to something else, right? So that it is not, you don't lose them, right? You keep the pace light and energetic.
That's awesome. Now, as far as activities, no, I'm sorry. You mentioned curriculum before I put in my next question, because let me make sure. What curriculum do you use? You guys make one up? You purchase one? What curriculum do you use?
So what we have throughout the years, there was purchased curriculums from before I was even here. And what they would do, what they realized is most camp curriculums are like 7, 8, not usually 9 weeks of curriculum. So that's when you have to supplement with other things that go with it and add on to it. So that's, we utilize a variety of different curriculums that have been used throughout the year. And so now what they do is we recycle, because they have 10 years, I want to say, at least 10 years of curriculum that's been used throughout the years. And so then this year I looked at 2012's curriculum and I recycled it, because you have the kids have aged out. They won't know. Maybe some of the staff remember, but doubtful, right? So, and then you go through it, you comb through it, what works, what aged well, what didn't, right? So what's still applicable today, what's not. And then, but it gives you that baseline, like, okay, here, and we always start with the Bible curriculum. Okay, this is what we want to talk about for this week. Bible, here's the theme, here's the story, here's the verse, boom. Now, if we're going to do activities, are there games that might subtly reinforce without having to be really loud about it? I don't have to explain, oh, this reinforces what you learn in the Bible. But like, if there's a way to reinforce it, awesome. And that same goes to your arts and crafts or whatever. But it's helpful, I think, for the staff, whoever's helping, because then they can create those natural conversations with the students of saying, like, oh, isn't this crazy how this kind of connects? Like, isn't this, right? So, but yeah, that's normally what we do. We start with the Bible and then we work backwards into other things. So, and we have all of that digitally stored. So
Awesome. But if a church wanted to create their own,
yeah,
what would be key? And I think you said this, so feel free to say,
sure,
as I previously said, what would be some elements for them to have in there? You come up with a theme, you put your activities around the theme to reinforce it. But what are some other elements you would recommend that they have in there if they're looking to do their own curriculum?
I think I mentioned stories. Like, when you got to have stories from the Bible that help the Bible come to life. I am a big believer in, let's also have stories that show the weaknesses of the participants in the Bible that point us back to Christ. I think, having grown up in the church, I think it was very hard for me to read the Bible, learn about the Bible, because it also often felt like well, I'm never going to be as good as these guys. Like, I'm not ever going to be a Moses. I'm not going to be an Abraham. And, the more I study, the more I read and reread and administer to, I start to realize the flaw in that thinking, to realize the humanity that's also there. And that I think anyone who wants to work with children and youth people, I think from any background, it's important to look at the flaws that God was able to utilize. And let me amend that. God only used ordinary people to do extraordinary things. And I think that is something I hold on to every day. And I preach to my staff that we need to make sure that the kids feel that as well, right? That they realize God's not asking you to be Superman or Tyreek Hill. He's asking you to be you, and he will use you to glorify him if you let him. And let's look at Moses and his speech impediment that he had. Let's look at Abraham and his pride that he had. Like, let's look at all these different things that we needed, that God needed to mold us, right? So I think that's really important when I'm talking to my Bible teachers, to be really authentic about that in their own lives.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Now, what activities?
Okay.
Okay, you got your activities is going to go along with the lesson. You figure that out the best you can.
Sure.
But what are some key activities that you have found? Like, I don't care what the age group, well, not necessarily age group, but what the nationality of the kid, where they come from, suburbia, urban, these activities seem to work. And kids seem to like these activities. And if you're going to do a kids program, if you had the space and such, what activities you say you have to have this? What would you say?
Well, I would say games. Games is huge. And I think if we want to break that down a little smaller, I think dodgeball. As much as some people have mixed feelings about it, man, like, there are so many variations. you just get a set of balls and you get the gator skin, so they're not destroyed. Like the kids get hit by them, they're not hurt that much. Like my 5-year-old can play dodgeball. It's not a big deal, right? But if they have a set of balls, there are so many different variations of dodgeball that you can play where you don't need to break the bank and always come up with these. They're already online for you. Totally good, right? Like, so it makes it easy. I think if we're going arts and crafts, like arts and crafts is a huge piece. But I think even then, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Learning how to work with beads, like beading, making bracelets, and there are a lot of cool ways you can do that to reinforce the gospel too, with different colored beads. And it actually is a great tool for kids to take with them to minister to other kids. I think GIMP is always very popular, yeah, those are two very, very easy activities that I think are good. And then the other thing I would always say, or I guess it's 3, Play-Doh, coloring. Believe it or not, Tara, I'll tell you what, when I was working with at-risk youth, detailed coloring pages, if a kid's having a really rough day and you give them a detailed coloring page, it's amazing how therapeutic that is, because they just color and then they can just talk and have these casual conversations, right? Like, it's really helpful. And then Legos, just a bunch of random Legos in a bin. I watched my 5th and 6th grade boys and everybody just build these cool contraptions, because it creates those natural opportunities for staff to go, hey, why are you making that? What led you to make that? Well, why do you like that? That's really cool. What made you think of this, right? So I think that is, and there's so many places that, yeah, I think Legos are just such a great opportunity for people to connect, because adults like playing with Legos too, just to make random things.
I am so glad you told me about Legos, because that is that's a sleeper. It's easy.
It's easy.
Legos aren't necessarily cheap these days.
No.
Easy.
You gotta get the big bulk boxes.
You can find them.
Yeah,
that's what I was just about to say. But if you can break down, you did say something about the beads to make bracelets that can represent the gospel. For those who may not know, like me.
Yes.
Can you break that down? And is there like a website or some type of sheet that'll explain like what colors would mean this and kind of how to do that exercise?
Yes, I'm gonna look that up right now. It's called the Salvation Bracelet. And each bead has there's different bead colors. They did it, and a lot of child evangelists will do this. They will have you have a black bead to represent sin, a red bead to represent the blood of Christ, a blue to represent the baptism we have in this, white to represent the cleansing that when God rose from the dead, green to represent the new growth and new life that we have, and yellow to keep us focused on heaven. So there's a lot of different variations that I believe as well. But that, it's just an opportunity then for them to go forth and have this on and be like, why do you have such a random assortment of beads, right? So, and I think, it's always good to just be like, well, this is a representation of me all in one thing, of like, I'm all of these things, right? So I think that it helps as a great conversation starter. Yes.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
You have a kid, you talked about the coloring, the detailed coloring book that helps to distress. Have there been any typical either dispositions and or issue that you found that most kids, say 5th graders to teens, are there any particular issues, dispositions? Let me say issue, because I want to do the disposition different.
Okay.
Do you find any typical issues to be aware of when you're ministering to kids? Let's say 5th, 6th graders to right before high school, let's say middle school.
Yes. I appreciate you asking that, because that's one of the reasons I wanted to teach middle school. That was where I found myself having the biggest heart for. I I would say respect is always a word that comes to mind. You know, I think jokingly you can say middle school kids are like a bag of cats because they, you know, that they're all over the place and you don't want to shake the bag or it gets crazy, right? So I also like, you know, just that they're wandering around in the dark. They're trying to figure out who they are. You know, be it, you know, wherever you're from, I think that's a common issue, is that middle schoolers are at this point where I want to be treated more like an adult. I don't necessarily want to do what I have to do to get that treatment,
Right.
but I want to be treated as such, right? So I think, you know, as adults, it's easy to fall into the trap of saying, well, you've got to give respect to get it. And they will not understand that. They're not going to follow that. It's more of a, as the adult, we almost have to die unto ourselves and say, well, I'm going to give you this respect regardless because I love you, because I care about you. And I'm hoping that after you get to build a relationship with me, you will return that respect, right? So, but I would say that that is the biggest issue I've seen is, especially if I worked with more challenging campers and or students, it was always, I feel like I'm not heard. I feel like I'm not respected. So, you know, and so heard is probably the other big pillar. I want to feel heard. I want to hear I have a voice, that my opinions matter, that my perspective matters. They start to realize there's a bigger world out there. Now, I think that middle schoolers often are infected with this disease called I've got it figured all out by this, right? So you got to kind of like mold that, but it's such a crucial age to mold, because once you get to high school, statistically, they're not going to change their minds about anything at this point because we've already reinforced it, or society has, right? So it's such a crucial point where we have to take a second and go, I want to hear what you have to say. I value your opinion. You are an individual. You are a child of God. Let's talk. Like, you know, keeping in mind that we need to respect others as well. We need to respect their opinions, you know? So when it comes to Bible, that can be tricky, I think, you know, because then it's, everybody's got strong opinions or their own opinions. And so ground rules become a really important thing of, hey, we're going to talk about this stuff, but let's have some ground rules too, right? So I think that's when we look at our 5th and 6th grade campers, students, and then 7th and 8th grade, even, we kind of go, all right, ground rules, but also we want to hear you. We do respect you. We do believe that what you have has value to it. And then you need to show it. So, which is, I think, hard, right? To sometimes, because they're middle schoolers, right? So it can be a challenge. So yeah, I think that has been the biggest issue that we have to train our staff to do. You know, so, and there's a lot of things you can do. Like I said, I like to train people about behavior management, of just like, hey, if there's behavior, there's 4 categories on where they're going to, why they're doing what they're doing. And I didn't believe it at first that you could narrow it down to 4. You really can. It's crazy. So training your staff on that. And then what do you do when this happens? And a lot of times that's when you have to look at injustice, justice, and restorative justice. Of saying, middle schoolers are very prone to saying there's a power imbalance. It feels like I have no voice, right? So, you know, how do I restore this appropriately? How do I swallow my pride sometimes and say, you know what, you're right, you know, and how far that goes, right? And on the flip side, how quickly you can lose someone's respect by a sarcastic comment, or the moment you shut them down without hearing them, right? So, you know, and then finally, I would say we talk a lot about grace. Does not mean there's no boundaries. You know, that there needs to be boundaries, and when the boundary is violated, it's called upon. But then there's grace. And so when we have campers that do that, there's always grace, but there's still the boundary, right? Like that has to be there too. So
Awesome, man. Very, very, very powerful, brother. Now, would you say the being heard piece, as far as the respect, is that the number one, or might there be another one, that this is what respect looks like to the middle schooler? And I'll say this because sometimes, and it's very true, we have to not look at this as a middle schooler, but we have to look at this is who we're trying to minister to.
Amen.
And that individual requires this so that they can listen and hear and accept.
Yeah.
us. But would you say one, being heard and their views being respected? Don't have to agree with it, but being heard and being respected. Is there a number two, or would you say that would be the main one of what respect looks like to that age group?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's funny. I almost would separate the being heard into its own category, because yes, heard feeds into respect, but I think respect has so many different connotations in our word, like you semantically, that can be taken so many different ways.
Right.
When my experience of working in Philadelphia and other at-risk situation areas, often what we hear when a kid was struggling is, well, they disrespected me. And so I challenged that a lot. I went, what does that mean? How? Well, they told me to be quiet when I was talking to somebody. It's like, okay. Well, I felt disrespected. Well, why? Like asking those questions. And then that kind of goes into, now they're being heard, they're being asked. But as you said, I think it's really important to say they have need, each student, each person has their own needs to be ministered to, right? Like in order for them to trust, in order for them to hear you, right? And I think that also kind of links back to, you're hearing them, you are seeing them, maybe we want to say it that way, it's hearing and seeing. And I think that comes back to the hierarchy of needs that you can learn about in psychology, right? Like, and I'm a big believer, and we say it to our staff all the time. If you have a camper that comes in and is miserable, and they're never normally miserable, and you say, hey, what's up? Well, that's step one. Ask them what's wrong. Don't just assume they're being bad. Like, be like, what's going on? Have that relationship. And then if they go, I'm hungry, I didn't eat breakfast, we didn't even get a lot of dinner last night, solve that need. And now you're creating a relationship, you're hearing them, you're seeing them, right? It's all feeding into the hierarchy of needs, and then they're fine, right? I'm really, and in this presentation I can send you, like, we talk about carry in behaviors, carry out behaviors. I did a whole grad class on behavior management. So like what are they bringing in? What does that look like? If this kid is coming in raging, chances are it's not at you. It's probably something that happened at home or on the street or at school or whatever. Like, they're bringing it in, and it's not personal. So you need to go, hey, what's going on? Like, how can I help? I want to be here. And sometimes it's, hey, can I pray for you right now? Like, I just want to pray for you. And how many kids have ever had someone just say, let me pray for you right in this moment, right? Like, it throws some of my staff off too. They're like, what? So, or parents. I prayed with some parents in the parking lot, and they don't expect it, but it's like, yeah, because we're Christian camp, and we are the church. Like, why are we not representing, like, be open with it. In so many places in this world, you can't be. So, sorry if I kind of went on a tangent.
No, that's perfect. You mentioned ground rules.
Yes.
You give me one. I don't want to drag this
No,
out.
yeah.
But I did want to get a little clarity on that. So you're willing to share respect, and as they defined it for themselves, but then also you're saying it's important to lay down those ground rules. Give me an example of what a ground rule from your guys' perspective would be, and what you typically say and hold kids to.
That we are going to use I statements. I think it's really easy to say you think, or they think, or everybody in here thinks. No. I think this, because when we're before the Almighty, when when glory comes, it's going to be him and I, right? So right. And I think that's really helpful, especially with teenagers, to be like, don't lump somebody else into your comment, because maybe they didn't want to come and now they feel disrespected,
right?
Or maybe they did, but now there's somebody else who feels bull, right? Like, you're picking on them. So it's always say, I feel, I think. And that also helps with behavior management as a secondary, like, yeah, but because I use it with my kids if they make me mad. I feel like this behavior made me mad. I felt upset when you did this, So I think when you're giving responses about, okay, how did this passage of the word make you feel, this verse? I feel like I don't understand it. And it might be like, me neither, right? So I think that's so. But I statements is an easy example.
Awesome. Any this is the other one. Any dispositions you find to be typical, and how to get kids involved? In other words, we're moving into session 1, session 4, whatever the case is. And then they're just kids, like, make me want to, this is corny, or
Yeah.
whatever the case may be. And some of it's trying to be cool, is whatever. I don't want to get into my thing, but what might that be that you found to be pretty common? Because again, as churches, and for the most part, a lot of our churches are sort of older, and they're bringing young people in, and the young people are probably going to assume this is not going to be fun. You know what I mean? My mom made me come here, or whatever it is. And what ways do you found to break that, to get them involved and into the moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say first off, it is the disposition. You already nailed it. It is typical of the age. I'm not going to show you I'm having a good time because I don't want you to know. I'm going to tell you it's terrible, but I'll go home and tell mom I love it, right? Because they're not going to tell us. They don't want to.
Almost expect it.
Expect it
To some degree.
Correct.
Like this might be the initial behavior presentation from a young person.
And the affect that they're showing you is not personal. Like whenever we talk about behavior, when we ever talk, it's not personal, it's motivated, right? When we can take the personal out and look objectively at actions that middle schoolers or young teens or almost high schoolers do, it makes you a better teacher. I think it keeps you calm, even when it's hard, right? So I think that is really helpful to remember. It's not personal. I think as you were speaking about how do we get young people to be more engaged, how do we get them to buy in? Part of that starts with who's helping with the facilitation. Like I know when we started this, we talked about having an individual that kind of leads it, but we taught, and I really mean we had to teach our staff in orientation this summer because I think it's a lost thing. We had to teach our staff how to play, how to actually engage with the campers, be with them, play the game, do the craft, whether you like it or not. It's not for you, it's for them. So, but if you are engaged, they are more like 10 times more likely to get into it. And with middle schoolers, double that, right? They want to be engaged. And they want to know that you're invested because they're looking to. So if you have young teens or older teens helping out or young adults helping out, they have to be just as engaged. They have to like leave that pride at the door. That's where it starts, because then they feed off of that, right? For better or for worse. So I think, that's, and the only other thing I would add is try to keep the beginning exciting as much as you can, right? If you have random games to play, like you said, or you have ridiculous prizes, and when they call you corny, I'm that obnoxious person that goes, "You're right, I do love corn. How'd you know?" And they're like, "That's the worst joke ever." I said, "Don't worry, they just get worse. Don't worry, they get worse." So you know what I mean? Like, or they'll say, "Yeah, you're drawing." I said, "I was a terrible drawer. I apologize. I was never good at it." And they hate it, right? Like they hate, but at the same time, I don't care that they can see I can be cheesy as a grown man, right? Like, and and I tell them all the time, it's like, don't mistake my kindness for weakness, right? But I can be just as corny. Why not, right? So like, it's embrace the,
that's a funny dynamic with kids. Like I used to purposely do that to my kids.
Oh yeah.
To be corny on some level, it's almost like they like the fact that they can say you're corny.
Yes.
But they know you're trying.
Yes.
It's so weird. It's hard to explain.
So weird.
But that is very true, Jonathan. That is a very, very true. And it's a sweet spot.
Yes.
Because you can lose them, but there is something to that.
Yeah, there's the you're doing too much side of it too. But
right.
But it's, and I think again, but middle schoolers are way smarter than I think some people want to give them credit for. And they can smell, you breathe in your authenticity. And if you're trying to be the cool person to them all the time, they're going to think that's weird. Like they're gonna be like, that doesn't make sense to me. Why are you doing that? And then you're going to lose them anyway. Right. So I think it's that you're right. It's a balance of saying, I don't need to impress you, but I am here for you. Like, we don't need to be friends, but I will be friendly to you. I want to be a spiritual mentor to you, really representing that balance of what real love looks like, Christ-like love. So,
Again, I hope this interview, this discussion was as much a blessing to you as it was for me. I have taken many of the things that he said. Many of these things were confirmation in which we were doing. And then some things gave us new ideas to start. So again, hopefully that was a blessing to you. And prayerfully in the future, we can bring more hopeful, helpful videos to you in this regard. God bless you and continue to be a blessing.